Hi, I'm Rowella. Do you know what it feels like to be treated like you don't even belong in your own bloodline? At my sister's wedding, 500 people watching. My brother-in-law called me trash, then punched me like I was nothing. My sister? She turned away. My parents? They told me to leave, said I was an embarrassment. But 5 minutes later, my private jet landed outside. And what happened after that? 69 missed calls. Not a single one worth answering. Before we dive in, what time are you listening to this, and where are you? Drop a comment below. I read every single one. It started with a casual phone call. "Oh, Marjorie's wedding is on the 15th, my mother said. Her voice clipped, as if she was reading off a grocery list. No excitement, no warmth, and no invitation. I sat in my office overlooking the marina, staring at the sunlight dancing on the water, wondering if I'd misheard her. "The 15th?" I asked, my voice careful, quiet. "That's soon." "Mm-hmm," she replied. "It's at the old Halverson mansion by the ocean. You know the one. Anyway, I have to run. Busy with the arrangements." That was it. "No, we can't wait to see you." "No, your invitation must have gotten lost in the mail." Nothing. I hung up, my fingers still clutching the phone, feeling like a ghost floating through my own family. I'd spent years hearing subtle reminders that I wasn't like them. To them, I was the one who flies people around, as if building Blue Horizon charters from scratch, negotiating contracts, and managing a fleet of private jets was no more impressive than being a glorified driver. Meanwhile, Marjorie was the princess, the golden child, the one who always belonged. I opened the gift bag they'd sent a week ago, thinking maybe there'd be a clue, an invitation tucked inside. Instead, there was a navy blue napkin embroidered with a single letter, V. The wedding monogram. Not mine, not even our family's initial. Just theirs. A decorative reminder of a celebration I wasn't really part of. For a moment, I considered not going. Why should I put myself in the line of fire? Why show up just to be treated like an afterthought, or worse, a nuisance? But the more I thought about it, the more something inside me hardened. Skipping it would be easy. Staying invisible was what they wanted. No, I wouldn't give them that satisfaction. So I cleared my schedule. I arranged for one of my captains to cover a high-profile client flight and set my own itinerary. If I was going on my terms. And that meant arriving the way I've arrived everywhere else in my life. Quietly, deliberately, but with more power than they'd ever care to admit I had. On the morning of the wedding, I walked through my house, coffee in hand, listening to the low hum of the news on TV. It was spring in Newport, cool air rolling off the ocean, the kind that clings to your skin. I'd chosen my outfit carefully, understated but impossible to ignore. I wasn't there to outshine anyone, but I also wasn't about to fade into the background like they expected. As I drove along Ocean Drive toward the mansion, my mind wandered through memories I'd rather not revisit. Birthdays where they'd forgotten to invite me until the last minute. Holidays where I sat at the overflow table like a guest in my own family. Those wounds had scabbed over, but they never healed, and now, as I approached that sprawling estate, I felt them bleeding again. The Halverson mansion came into view, towering over the cliffs like a monument to old money and newer egos. Cars lined the driveway, valets in crisp uniforms darting back and forth, guests with perfect hair and designer suits milled about, holding glasses of champagne as if they'd been born doing it. I pulled up and handed over my keys, stepping out onto the stone path with a steady breath. My heels clicked against the walkway as I adjusted my jacket and walked toward the massive front doors. If they wanted me to feel like I didn't belong, fine. But I wasn't going to shrink. I wasn't going to play small. What I didn't know, what I couldn't know, was just how deep their disdain for me ran. But I had no idea how deep their disdain for me ran. Until I stepped into that mansion, the first thing I felt wasn't the ocean breeze or the music. It was the stairs, sharp and cold, like I'd walked into a room where I didn't belong. My heels clicked against the polished marble as I crossed the grand foyer, trying to look like I didn't notice the subtle glances and half-smiles that followed me. I'd been in rooms like this before, gilded spaces full of people who pretended to be polite while sizing you up like you were some curiosity. But this was worse. This was family. A waiter offered me a glass of champagne, and I took it, not because I wanted it, but because holding something made me feel less exposed. I scanned the crowd, 500 guests, maybe more, most of them strangers, all of them impeccably dressed, chatting in clusters like they'd known each other for years. And then I saw my parents. They stood near the staircase, my mother's hand lightly resting on my father's arm, both of them looking perfectly at ease. They didn't wave. They didn't even nod. It was as if I wasn't there at all. "Rowella," someone said, her voice syrupy and forced. "Marjorie. My sister." She glided toward me in her gown, a vision of grace, every inch the blushing bride. But her eyes told a different story. They flicked over me quickly, like I was a problem she didn't want to deal with. "I didn't know you were coming," she said, as if I hadn't been told the date weeks ago in the most offhand way possible. "I wouldn't miss your wedding," I said softly. I wanted to hug her, to tell her I was happy for her, but she was already leaning away, scanning the room as though she couldn't be seen too close to me. Before I could say anything else, a booming voice cut through the crowd. "Ah, there she is." Clayton. My new brother-in-law. He was holding court in the center of a group of men I recognized from business magazines, people whose names were always attached to words like influential and powerful. Clayton's smile was wide and theatrical, but his eyes gleamed with something meaner. "Everyone, this is Rowella," he announced, pulling me into the circle before I could protest. For a second, I thought maybe he was going to do the decent thing, introduce me properly, mention my company, acknowledge me as his wife's sister. But instead, he smirked and said, "She's the one who collects trash from her passengers." The group chuckled, some politely, some with open amusement. My face burned, but I didn't flinch. That was the game. Make me look small, then watch me squirm. "You know," Clayton continued, "private jets may look glamorous, but someone has to pick up after the passengers. Isn't that right, Rowella?" I forced a smile, feeling my nails dig into the side of my glass. "That's one way to describe running a multi-million-dollar charter company," I said evenly, meeting his eyes. There was a brief silence, just long enough for me to know my words had landed, but Clayton didn't miss a beat. "Of course," he said, clapping me on the shoulder as if I were some kid sister. "Every empire starts with a broom, right?" My parents were close enough to hear. I saw my mother glance in our direction and then turn away, pretending to be engrossed in conversation with someone else. They weren't going to step in. They never did. I excused myself before I said something I'd regret. As I moved toward the dining area, I noticed the place settings, navy napkins embroidered with a golden V, perfectly folded at every seat. That letter again. Not for me, not for anyone like me. It was their world, their table, and I was just a guest, barely tolerated, never welcome. I found an empty corner near a window overlooking the ocean, letting the chatter of the party dull into background noise. For years, I'd convinced myself that maybe they didn't mean it, that the exclusion, the little slights were just oversights. But standing there, invisible in a room full of people, I knew better. This wasn't carelessness. This was intentional. I sipped the champagne, the bitterness coating my tongue, and told myself to breathe. I could endure this. I'd endured worse. But just when I thought I'd reached my limit, Clayton decided words weren't enough. I thought I'd reached my limit, until Clayton decided words weren't enough. The punch came out of nowhere, a blur of rage disguised as a man. One moment, I was stepping toward the ballroom exit, hoping to collect myself before anyone noticed the tears threatening to form, and the next, pain exploded across my jaw. For a split second, my mind went blank. No sound, No thought, just a flash of white. Then came the sting, the ringing in my ears, and the sudden realization that Clayton had just hit me. Gasps rippled through the room. 100 phones lifted like reflexes. I could see screens glowing, capturing my humiliation in real time. The music hadn't even stopped. The band kept playing like they were afraid to acknowledge what had just happened. I staggered back, catching myself on the edge of a table. Champagne flutes rattled, one toppling over and spilling across the crisp white linen. My first thought, absurdly, was to apologize, to smooth it over, make myself small like I always did. But then I saw his face, flushed, sneering, enjoying this. You don't belong here," he spat, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Trash like you doesn't deserve a seat at this table." My mouth opened, but no words came out. Marjorie appeared in my peripheral vision, standing frozen a few feet away. She looked at me, then at him, then back at the floor. She didn't move. She didn't say a word. "Clayton," I managed, my voice steadier than I felt. "Back off." He took a step closer, swaying slightly, the smell of whiskey clinging to him. "Or what? You gonna run crying to Mommy and Daddy? Oh wait, they're over there." He pointed toward the staircase. I followed his gaze and saw them. My parents. Watching. Silent. My mother's hand on my father's arm, just like before. They weren't horrified. They weren't rushing to me. They were assessing the situation, calculating what would cause the least embarrassment. "I said back off," I repeated, gripping the edge of the table to steady myself. He smirked, then reached out and slapped the champagne from my hand. The glass shattered at our feet, spraying droplets across my dress. "Make me," he growled. Something in me cracked, not just from the punch, but from the sheer absurdity of it all. This was my sister's wedding. I had flown here, walked into this pit of judgment, tried to be civil, and this was how they treated me. "You're pathetic," I said, my voice low, calm. "And you're drunk." That did it. His fist connected with my face before I even saw him move. The room erupted, not in outrage, but in whispers, in the faint clicks of phones recording. I crumpled to one knee, tasting blood, my vision blurring. "Get out!" My father's voice cut through the noise. Not at Clayton. At me. I turned toward him, disbelief washing over me. "What?" "You're embarrassing us," he said, his tone cold, final. My mother nodded in agreement, as if I were the problem. Embarrassing them. Not the groom who'd just hit me in front of 500 people, not the guests gleefully recording the spectacle. Me. A murmur of voices rose around me. "Is she okay? Did you see that? Unbelievable." But no one stepped forward. No one offered a hand. Marjorie finally moved. For a second, I thought she might help me up, defend me, do anything. But she only whispered, "Please, just go. Don't make this worse." I laughed bitterly, a sound that didn't even sound like me. Make this worse? He hit me. "Rowella," my mother said sharply. "Leave." There it was. Years of being the quiet one, the overlooked one, the one who made herself small so they wouldn't have to acknowledge me, all boiling down to this. I pushed myself to my feet, legs trembling, and grabbed the navy napkin from the table, pressing it to my lip where blood pooled, that same embroidered V. Their name, their table, their world, and now it was stained with my blood. I walked past them slowly, feeling every pair of eyes on me, every phone capturing my shame. No one stopped me, not my parents, not my sister, not even the man who'd just assaulted me. I stumbled out into the night, blood on my face, humiliation burning in my chest, but they didn't know what was waiting for me outside. The hum of jet engines was the sweetest sound I'd ever heard. It cut through the laughter and clinking glasses that still bled from the open doors of the mansion, drowning out the noise of a world that had just spat me out. I wiped my face with the back of my hand, feeling the sting of my split lip and the warm trickle still sliding down my chin. My heels clicked unevenly against the cobblestone as I made my way toward the valet circle, each step pulling me farther from that ballroom of betrayal. The valet barely looked at me at first. Then when he did, his smirk was a mirror of the same quiet contempt I'd just walked through. I knew what he saw. A woman in a blood-stained dress, holding a crumpled napkin like a shield. Another casualty of family politics gone public. I was moments from collapsing under the weight of their judgment when the low roar grew louder. Not from the road, but from above. He turned his head, confusion replacing his sneer as the sleek silhouette of my Gulfstream descended toward the private strip just beyond the mansion grounds. The runway lights blinked in the distance, welcoming me home in a way that house full of family never had. Michael was already there by the curb, tall and steady as always, his crisp uniform immaculate even in the salty night breeze. "Ready to go home, boss?" His voice was soft, but there was a firmness to it, the kind of steadiness that makes you remember who you are when you've forgotten. That one word, boss, pulled me back into myself. I wasn't just a humiliated sister or a punching bag in a ballroom full of cowards. I was Rowella Vance, CEO of Blue Horizon Charters, the woman who had built an empire in the sky while they still saw me as the awkward little sister who collected trash for a living. "More than ready," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. We walked together toward the waiting car that would take us to the jet. The night air cooled the heat in my face, numbing me just enough to keep moving. Through the mansion's arched windows, I could still see them. Clayton holding court like nothing had happened, Marjorie laughing weakly beside him, my parents glued to their places, too committed to their performance of civility to chase me. They hadn't even tried. As the car door shut behind me, my phone lit up in my lap. Mom. Dad. Marjorie. 69 missed calls. The screen screamed. A pitiful attempt at damage control. My thumb hovered over the green button, but I didn't press it. They weren't calling to apologize. They were calling to protect their image. By the time we reached the jet, the engines had settled into a gentle purr. The stairs lowered with mechanical grace, and the clean, quiet interior of my world opened up before me. I stepped inside and exhaled for the first time since Clayton's fist had met my face. I walked straight to the galley, pulled the navy napkin from my hand, still wet with my blood, and threw it into the trash. Reaching for the cabinet, I grabbed a fresh white napkin, this one embroidered with the Blue Horizon logo, and pressed it to my lip. My napkin. My name. My world. Michael appeared at the doorway. "Where to?" "Home," I said simply. Then, after a beat, "And don't answer any calls from that list." As the engines revved again and the ground began to fall away beneath us, I leaned back into the leather seat, feeling the shift. Not just in altitude, but in me. I wasn't just leaving that mansion. I was leaving their version of me behind. But running doesn't heal the wound, and theirs still throbbed deep in my chest. The jet was quiet now, the engines a low hum beneath my feet, but inside me, the noise hadn't stopped. I stared at my reflection in the darkened window, barely recognizing the woman looking back. My cheek was swollen, my lip still split, but it wasn't the physical ache that kept me frozen in that seat. It was the echo of their voices. Clayton's drunken sneer, my parents' cold dismissal, Marjorie's silence. I didn't cry during the flight from Newport. I held it in, as I always did. But as soon as we leveled off, and the city lights disappeared beneath the clouds, the dam broke. Tears came fast, burning hot against my face, blurring everything. I tried to wipe them away before Michael could notice, but of course he did. He didn't say much. That was his gift. Michael had been my pilot for years, but more than that, he'd been a witness to the life I built, the one my family never cared to see. He came by my seat, crouched slightly, and handed me a fresh cloth. You don't have to keep proving your worth to people who enjoy breaking you, he said quietly. You know who you are. I couldn't answer. My throat was too tight. Instead, I nodded and turned toward the window again, letting his words settle somewhere deep, though I wasn't ready to believe them yet. When we landed in Los Angeles hours later, I felt like I'd left a part of myself back in Rhode Island. Or maybe it had been taken from me. Michael walked me to the car waiting on the tarmac, his presence steady, unspoken reassurance. Get some rest, he said, as I stepped into the back seat. I managed a faint smile. The drive to my downtown penthouse felt endless. By the time I stepped into my apartment, the sun had begun to rise, casting pale light over the cityscape outside my floor-to-ceiling windows. I set my clutch down on the marble counter and collapsed onto the couch, ignoring the dozens of missed calls lighting up my phone. They didn't stop calling. My parents left message after message, their voices sharp and impatient. Call back and make this right. Not a single one said, Are you okay? Marjorie texted me too, a half-hearted apology buried in excuses. Clayton had too much to drink. You know how he gets. Don't make this worse than it is. I almost laughed at that. How could I make it worse? They'd already reduced me to nothing in front of 500 strangers. I spent the morning sitting there, letting it all wash over me. Every birthday I'd organized for them, every check I'd written to bail them out of trouble, every time I'd been their fixer, their helper. And still, I'd been nothing more than a target for their amusement. Sometime in the afternoon, when I finally gathered the energy to unpack, I noticed an envelope tucked inside my clutch. There was no name on it, no note. I opened it carefully, my hands trembling. Inside were several printed screenshots of a group chat. My heart dropped as I read the names: Clayton, Marjorie, Mom, Dad. The messages made my stomach twist. Let's make sure she feels out of place. It's time she knows her role. Don't bother sending her a real invite. If she shows, she shows. She'll still come. She always does. And when she does, well, it'll be fun to watch. And then Clayton. Trash collector in a room full of real people. Perfect. My vision blurred again, but not from tears of grief this time. This was different. Hotter. Sharper. It wasn't humiliation anymore. It was clarity. They hadn't just hurt me. They'd planned it. They wanted me small. They wanted me humiliated. I set the pages on the table, sat back, and let the weight of it all settle. Then, for the first time in days, I felt something other than despair. I felt purpose. I walked back to the kitchen, opened the small trash bin, and saw it. The navy napkin I'd used to wipe the blood from my lip on the jet. I left it there, exactly where it belonged. They could keep that version of me, the one they thought they could destroy. Because they'd just given me the one thing they feared most, a reason to fight back. And I knew exactly where to start, by reminding them who I really am. The next morning, I drove straight to Blue Horizons headquarters, the place where I'd built my reputation from the ground up, away from their influence, away from their judgment. The glass doors slid open, and the receptionist greeted me with a warmth I hadn't felt in days. "Morning, Ms. Vance," she said, her voice soft but steady. It grounded me. Here, I wasn't the trash collector. I was the CEO. Michael was already in my office when I walked in, leaning casually against the window, reviewing some flight logs. "You look like you haven't slept," he said, concerned. "I haven't," I replied honestly, tossing my bag onto the desk. I powered up my computer and pulled up financial records going back 2 years. "I need to know if Clayton's been using my name or this company for anything shady." Michael didn't ask why. He didn't need to. He simply nodded, moving behind me to help sift through the data. "Want me to get the legal team on standby?" "Not yet," I said. "But soon." The hours blurred as I combed through transactions, emails, anything that might tie Clayton to my business. My gut told me he'd been leveraging my connections, and if I was right, it would be enough to rip the carefully crafted mask off his smug face. By noon, I had my attorneys drafting preliminary statements, preparing for the possibility of going public. I wasn't pulling the trigger, not yet, but the safety was off. That evening, I arranged to meet Marjorie, a private booth in a quiet corner of an upscale restaurant. Neutral territory. I arrived early, as I always did, letting the dim lighting calm me while I rehearsed what I'd say. When she walked in, her posture was stiff, her smile brittle. She slid into the seat across from me, her hands gripping her clutch like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. "You look tired," she said, avoiding my eyes. "You mean bruised," I corrected, my tone cool. She flinched. "Clayton, don't," I interrupted sharply. "Don't defend him." The waiter came, and we both waved him off. This wasn't a dinner. This was war. The quiet kind. "Why did you even come, Marjorie?" I asked, leaning forward. "To ease your conscience? Or to make sure I don't make a scene?" She didn't answer. Instead, she reached into her clutch for a tissue, dabbing at the corner of her eyes. "He's under a lot of pressure. The wedding, the business." I slid the envelope across the table, the one with the screenshots of their little group chat. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. Watching her face crumble was almost surreal, a cocktail of shock, shame, and fear washing over her. "Marjorie," I said quietly, "this is the polite version of the conversation. The next one won't be." Her breathing quickened as she scrolled through the pages. "You weren't supposed to see this," she whispered. "No," I said, my voice steady. "I wasn't supposed to be humiliated, yet here we are." Her phone buzzed on the table. Clayton's name flashed on the screen. She quickly turned it over, but not before I saw the preview. "Is she folding? Don't let her play you." I leaned back. "He's scared," I said simply. "He should be." Marjorie finally looked at me, really looked at me, as if seeing her little sister for the first time in years. "Please don't do this," she whispered. I smiled, leaning closer so she could feel the weight of every word. "Then stop giving me reasons to—" Clayton wasn't one to take warnings quietly, and his next move made sure of it. I woke up to the shrill buzz of my phone against the nightstand, far earlier than I wanted. Michael's name flashed across the screen. "Don't panic," he said the moment I answered, which of course made me panic. "Turn on the TV." I scrambled for the remote, switching on the news. And there it was, my face plastered across the morning broadcasts, accompanied by headlines that turned my stomach. "Private Jet CEO, under investigation for fraud." My photo, the one from last year's Forbes profile, now framed like a mugshot. My chest tightened as the anchor's voice droned on about possible embezzlement, misappropriation of funds, and allegations from credible sources. I knew exactly who those sources were. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. It felt like the walls of my penthouse were closing in. By the time I reached the office, the damage had spread like wildfire. Blue Horizon's lobby buzzed with reporters. Cameras clicked in my face as I pushed through with Michael by my side, his presence a shield against the swarm. "No comment," he repeated like a mantra while I kept my eyes forward. Inside, the air was heavier than usual. My employees avoided my gaze, whispering in corners. I wanted to reassure them, but I couldn't even reassure myself. My assistant rushed over, her voice hushed. "The board called an emergency meeting. They're waiting for you upstairs." My heels echoed through the hall as I made my way to the conference room, each step sounding louder than the last. Inside, the board members sat in a semicircle, their expressions ranging from concerned to outright accusatory. "Rowella," one of them started, his voice sharp. "These are serious allegations. We need answers." "There are no answers to give because it's a lie," I said, trying to keep my tone even. But my pulse thudded in my ears. A woman across the table folded her arms. "Then how do you explain these documents?" She slid a navy blue folder toward me, my initials stamped across the front. I froze. That color, that symbol, it was deliberate, a cruel echo of the napkin at the wedding. Clayton wanted me to know he was behind this. I opened the folder. Inside were fabricated bank statements, perfectly doctored to make it look like I'd been siphoning funds for personal use. My signature, forged but convincing, sat at the bottom of each page. "Someone is setting me up," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "And you all know who." The room was silent. They knew, but knowing wasn't the same as caring. After an hour of grilling, they adjourned, leaving me with a promise of an independent investigation. I knew what that meant. A public hanging disguised as due process. When I got back to my office, I saw the blinking red light on my phone. Voicemail after voicemail. My mother's voice first. Cold, controlled. "Rowella, you need to call us back and make this right. You've embarrassed all of us." My father echoed her, angrier. "This is what happens when you think you're bigger than family." And then Marjorie. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "I'm sorry. I didn't know it would go this far. Clayton, he won't stop until you're destroyed. Please, just walk away before it gets worse." I sank into my chair, staring out at the skyline. Walk away. That was always their answer. Keep the peace by letting them win. It was how I'd survived all these years, by swallowing my pain until it choked me. I felt the sting of tears, hot and relentless. For the first time in years, I let them fall. Alone in that office, I allowed myself to break. Michael came in quietly, placing a coffee on my desk. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there until I finally met his eyes. "You're not done," he said simply. "They just think you are." It was such a small sentence, but it hit me like a defibrillator. They think I'm finished. Clayton thinks he's won. My family thinks I'll roll over like I always have. I wiped my face, sitting up straighter. "Get me everything we have on Clayton's connections, every deal, every favor, every weak spot." Michael nodded without hesitation. "What's the plan?" I exhaled slowly, feeling the weight in my chest shift into something sharper, more dangerous. "If he wants war," I said, my voice cold and deliberate, "I'll give him one, and I'll make sure the world watches him burn. Gaos, the first strike would have to be public, brutal, and undeniable." By the time I arrived at the hotel, the ballroom was already buzzing. Rows of cameras pointed at the podium I'd had set up, flanked by screens that would soon display everything Clayton wanted buried. The shareholders were packed into the front rows, their whispers sounding like a low, restless tide. I could feel their judgment before I even stepped into the room, the same judgment I'd felt all my life, only now amplified by flashing lights and media lenses. Michael walked beside me, calm as ever. "You ready?" he asked. "As I'll ever be," I said, smoothing my jacket. My heart was pounding, but my hands were steady. I had no room left for fear. At the back of the room, the double doors swung open. Clayton walked in like he owned the place. Marjorie trailed behind him, head lowered, not once meeting my eyes. Clayton smirked as he passed me, muttering just loud enough for me to hear, "This won't end well for you." I didn't flinch. Not anymore. When I stepped up to the podium, the room quieted instantly. "You've all heard their version," I said, my voice carrying through the speakers. "Now here's the truth." The first screen lit up behind me, a series of emails, unaltered and time-stamped, showing unauthorized transfers from Blue Horizons accounts. But not by me. Clayton's name appeared over and over. Gasps rippled through the crowd, and then came the recording. I'd debated whether to play it, but the decision had been made the moment I heard it. Clayton's own voice filled the room, clear and smug. She thinks she's untouchable. Wait until everyone sees her for what she really is. We'll put Rowella in her place. A sharp intake of breath echoed across the room. Someone muttered, "Unbelievable." Clayton jumped from his seat, red-faced. "This is slander!" he shouted. I didn't even look at him. "No," I said, still facing the crowd. "This is evidence." More documents appeared on the screens. Bank records, emails between Clayton and shell companies. My legal team had worked around the clock to make sure there were no holes, no questions. Clayton Vance used my company, my name, and my trust to funnel money illegally, I continued. And when I confronted him in private, he chose to destroy my reputation instead of facing the truth. The room erupted. Shareholders fired questions, voices overlapping. How long has this been happening? What does this mean for the company? What legal action are we taking? I raised a hand, silencing them. Blue Horizon will survive this, but only if we hold accountable those who think they can manipulate and exploit others without consequence. My eyes locked on Clayton. Never mistake kindness for weakness. Not anymore. Clayton's jaw tightened, but for once he had no clever retort. Marjorie stood frozen for a moment before quietly turning and walking out, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor. She didn't look back. The press shouted questions as I stepped away from the podium, cameras flashing like fireworks. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Michael handed me a clean white napkin as I walked off stage. I wiped my hands slowly, deliberately, leaving behind the last remnants of their world, the navy napkin, the shame, all of it. The cameras kept flashing, but I didn't look back. Let them take their pictures. This was my story now. But revenge, I would soon learn, doesn't stitch up the wound. It only stops the bleeding. A week had passed since the press conference. Los Angeles had been bathed in soft gold light all evening, the kind that makes the city look almost forgiving. I stood barefoot on my balcony, a mug of untouched tea growing cold in my hands. From up here, the city stretched out like an endless grid of lights, millions of lives, none of them knowing what mine had become. My phone buzzed on the table behind me. Again. Mom. Dad. A handful of cousins I hadn't spoken to in years. They all suddenly had words for me now. Carefully crafted messages about family, about healing, about how we all make mistakes. They hadn't cared about my well-being when Clayton humiliated me in front of 500 people. But now, with his name in the headlines for fraud and a lawsuit they couldn't ignore, they suddenly remembered my number. I let it ring. Michael had stopped by earlier that day to drop off documents from the lawyers. As he set them down, he'd looked at me and said, "You don't owe anyone an explanation for surviving." He was right. I'd spent so much of my life trying to prove I was worthy of their love, of their approval, that I forgot what I'd built and who I'd built it for. A small stack of mail sat by my door. Most of it was legal documents and business correspondence, but one envelope stood out, thick, off-white, my name written across it in Marjorie's looping script. I'd left it there for hours, unsure if I wanted to open it. Eventually, curiosity won. It wasn't long, just a single page. "Ro," it began. She hadn't called me that since we were kids, eating late dinners together at the kitchen table, back when we still believed being sisters meant being on the same side. "I don't expect you to forgive me." I froze at the wedding because I was afraid. Afraid of Clayton. Afraid of what it would mean to choose you over him, but I see now what my silence cost you. I'm sorry. I need space to figure out who I am without him. I hope someday you can see me as more than the person who hurt you. I read it twice, then a third time. My chest tightened, not with anger, but with something sadder. Understanding. I didn't pick up a pen. I didn't text or call her. Some things don't need words to exist. Quietly, in the privacy of my heart, I forgave her. Later that evening, I drove to the hangar. It was quiet there. The kind of quiet that makes you feel like you're the last person left in the world. My favorite jet was being prepped for a short trip. Engines humming softly, lights glowing against the polished concrete floor. I walked toward it, trailing my hand along the cool metal of the wing. This plane, this company, this life I had carved out, it was all mine. It had been mine long before they tried to take it from me. Clayton had taken a plea deal earlier that morning. My lawyers confirmed it. He wouldn't see the inside of a prison cell, but his name was permanently scorched. He was barred from doing business with Blue Horizon or any of its affiliates, his reputation left in ruins. It wasn't perfect justice, but it was enough for me to close that chapter. When I got home, I set my keys on the kitchen counter and noticed the white napkin folded neatly by the sink, the one Michael had handed me at the press conference. I hadn't moved it since that night. It wasn't Navy. It didn't carry their monogram. It was mine. I picked it up, smoothing the edges with my fingers. "The sky was always mine," I whispered, my voice steady in the stillness. "I just forgot I could fly above them." Some wounds never close, but they stop bleeding when you stop letting them cut you.